A family dinner turns catastrophic when my father slams his fist on the table and announces I have 3 days to vacate my home because it now belongs to my brother. The shock paralyzes me as my brother smirks. Instead of causing a scene, I remain silent, nodding slightly, already calculating my next move. They mistake my silence for defeat, never suspecting what awaits them when they return in 2 days. The drive home from that dinner felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel as I replayed my father's words over and over in my head. You have 3 days to get your stuff out, Arlo. That house belongs to your brother now. For 5 years I had poured everything into that house. My sweat, my savings, and countless hours transforming it from a barely habitable structure into a home. The property had been in our family for 2 generations, a small 3-bedroom ranch style sitting on just under an acre of land on the outskirts of town. When I moved in, the roof leaked, the plumbing was shot, and the electrical system was a fire hazard waiting to happen. My parents, Jack and Martha, had offered me what seemed like a fair deal at the time. I could live in the house and gradually renovate it while working for the family construction business. I accepted a salary 20% below market rate, with the understanding that the difference was essentially going toward my eventual ownership of the property. It was all laid out in a simple agreement we signed 3 years ago, after I had already completed the most urgent repairs. This makes it official, Dad had said, slapping me on the back as we signed the papers at the kitchen table. Keep up the good work, and in another 7 years, this place will be all yours, free and clear. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. My brother Bryce was a different story entirely. 2 years younger than me, he had always been the golden child despite his complete lack of responsibility or work ethic. While I started working for the family business at 16, Bryce bounced between colleges, never completing a degree but always having some new passion that required financial support from our parents. Bryce has a sensitive soul, Mom would say, whenever I pointed out the unfairness. Not everyone is cut out for manual labor like you, Arlo. That sensitive soul never stopped Bryce from treating our parents' credit cards like his personal ATM. 3 failed business ventures, a luxury car he couldn't afford, and an apartment in the expensive part of town that our parents subsidized monthly. Meanwhile, I lived with a partially renovated kitchen for 6 months, because I was putting every spare dollar into updating the ancient heating system in the house. Last Christmas, I overheard Mom assuring Bryce that they would figure something out about his latest financial crisis. At the time, I thought she meant they would help him set up a budget or maybe co-sign for a debt consolidation loan. Now I understood exactly what she meant. They would figure something out at my expense. The most frustrating part was how much I had sacrificed for the family business over the years. When the recession hit hard 4 years ago, I volunteered to delay taking a paycheck for 3 months so Dad could keep 2 of his longtime employees on the payroll. When equipment needed upgrading last year, I put off replacing my 15-year-old truck and contributed $12,000 from my savings toward a new backhoe the company desperately needed. Each time, my parents thanked me profusely. "We couldn't do this without you," Dad would say. "You're the backbone of this company's future." What a joke that seemed like now. I pulled into the driveway of the house that apparently wasn't going to be mine anymore, and sat there with the engine idling for a few minutes. The porch light was on, illuminating the new front door I had installed just last month. Custom woodwork that had taken me 3 weekends to complete. Inside, I went straight to my home office and opened the filing cabinet where I kept all important documents. The agreement about the house should have been right there in the folder labeled Property. But it wasn't. I tore through the entire cabinet, checking and rechecking every folder. Nothing. The sick feeling in my stomach intensified. When I confronted my father after dinner about the agreement, he had shrugged dismissively. That old thing must have been lost when we reorganized the company files. Anyway, circumstances change, Arlo. We need to do what's best for the whole family now. What he meant was what was best for Bryce. I collapsed into my office chair, trying to make sense of it all. Then I remembered something that sent me bolting upright. I had scanned a copy of the agreement and emailed it to myself, a habit I developed after Dad misplaced a receipt for materials I had purchased for a job 3 years ago. I opened my laptop and searched through my email archive. There it was, dated September 12th, 3 years ago. I opened the attachment with trembling fingers. The document was exactly as I remembered. It clearly stated that in exchange for accepting reduced wages and completing renovations valued at over $80,000, I would gain ownership of the property after 10 years. There was also a clause stating that if the arrangement needed to be terminated early for any reason, I would be entitled to financial compensation for the difference between my actual salary and market rate, plus the value of all improvements made to the property. I stared at the document, my father's signature bold at the bottom beside my own. This was legally binding. They couldn't just take the house from me without consequences. But why now? What had changed? As the question formed in my mind, I recalled the hushed conversations that had stopped abruptly when I entered rooms over the past few weeks. The way my mother had been especially solicitous, inviting me for dinner more frequently, asking oddly specific questions about my future plans. The way my father had suddenly suggested I might want to explore other opportunities beyond the family business. They had been planning this, working up to it. I looked around my office at the built-in bookshelves I had constructed by hand, the window seat with storage underneath that had taken an entire weekend to build. This wasn't just a house. This was 5 years of my life, my home. I reached for my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in a while. Samantha Williams. We had been good friends in college, and she had gone on to become an attorney, specializing in property law. She picked up on the third ring. "Sam," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need your help." "Let me get this straight," Samantha said after I explained my situation. "You've been living in and renovating this house for 5 years, with a written agreement that it would eventually be yours, and now your parents are trying to give it to your brother instead." "That's about the size of it," I confirmed, pacing back and forth in my living room. The hardwood floors that gleamed beneath my feet had been a nightmare to refinish. 3 solid weekends of backbreaking labor. "And they're claiming the agreement is lost," Samantha continued, her voice taking on the professional tone I remembered from our mock trial competitions in college. "But you have a scanned copy." "Yes, that's a start. But we need to gather everything, Arlo. Every shred of evidence that shows your investment in this property. Receipts, bank statements, before and after photos of the renovations, text messages, emails, anything that documents promises made to you about the house." I ran a hand through my hair. "That's going to be a lot of material, Sam." "Good. The more, the better. I also want you to write down a timeline of events, starting from when you first moved in, and including every major renovation, every conversation about ownership, every relevant interaction with your family about this property." Her confidence was steadying. This was why I had called her, not just for legal advice, but for the unshakable determination that had made her our debate team captain. Samantha had never backed down from a challenge. "What about the agreement itself? Is the scan enough?" "It's certainly better than nothing, but we'd ideally want the original." "Did your parents keep a copy at their house or the business office?" "Probably at the business. Dad keeps all important documents in his office safe. Any chance you could get access to that?" I considered the question. "Maybe. I still have a key to the office and I know the combination to the safe. Dad never changed it from Mom's birthday." "I'm not advising you to do anything illegal," Samantha said carefully. "But if you have legitimate access to those business premises as an employee, and you're looking for a document that pertains directly to you." "I understand." "Good. Now, how quickly can you gather all this evidence?" "The sooner we have a complete picture, the better advice I can give you. I'll start right now." After hanging up with Samantha, I created a new folder on my computer, labeled House Documentation, and began the process of gathering evidence. I dug out every receipt for materials I had purchased for renovations, took photos of all the improvements I had made, and compiled bank statements showing withdrawals for house-related expenses. I also created a spreadsheet comparing my salary to standard rates for my position, documenting the difference I had essentially invested in the house. The total was staggering, even to me. Between the below-market wages and the direct investment in renovations, I had put over $120,000 into the property. Next, I went through my text messages and emails, taking screenshots of any communication with my parents about the house. There were dozens of exchanges confirming our arrangement, from casual mentions to specific discussions about renovation plans and how they contributed to my equity in the property. "Looking great, son," my father had texted when I sent him photos of the completed kitchen renovation. "Adding value to your future asset." Your future asset. The words seemed cruel now. As I worked late into the night organizing the documentation, a question kept nagging at me. Why would they do this now, 5 years into our arrangement? What had changed that made them suddenly decide to give the house to Bryce? The answer had to be in their financial situation. My parents weren't the type to break promises unless they felt cornered. And the only thing that ever made them feel truly cornered was Bryce's recurring financial disasters. I needed to understand what I was really up against. The next morning, I decided to check the property records for the house, to make sure there were no surprises like liens or new mortgages I wasn't aware of. The county records office was quiet when I arrived, just a few employees and one other visitor researching property boundaries for a fence dispute. The clerk recognized me from my frequent visits related to construction permits for the family business. "Morning, Arlo. What can I help you with today?" "I need to see all the records related to the property at 128 Maple Street," I said, giving her my address. She typed the information into her computer. "Looks like there's been some recent activity on this property. Let me pull everything for you." "Recent activity?" My stomach tightened. The clerk returned with a folder and spread the documents out on the counter. Most were familiar to me, documents I had seen before related to the original purchase by my grandparents, the transfer to my parents, and various permits for work on the property over the years. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A new mortgage, dated just 3 weeks ago, for $175,000. The property had been free and clear before this. The original mortgage paid off years ago by my grandparents. "Can I get a copy of this document?" I asked, pointing to the mortgage. "Sure thing." While she made the copy, I examined the mortgage document more closely. The borrowers were listed as Jack and Martha Calloway, my parents. But there, on the second page, was something that made my hands shake with rage. A third signature. Mine. Except I had never signed any mortgage document. Never been asked to sign one. Never even known this transaction was happening. I looked more closely at the signature. It was a decent forgery, close enough to my actual signature to pass a casual inspection, but with subtle differences I could immediately recognize. Someone had forged my signature on a mortgage document, making me a co-signer on a $175,000 loan I knew nothing about. The clerk returned with my copies. "Anything else you need, Arlo?" I struggled to keep my voice level. "This mortgage from 3 weeks ago, was it recorded in person or submitted by mail?" "Let me check." She looked at her computer. It was brought in by the lender's representative. Standard practice. So the lender might not know the signature was forged. They would have simply accepted the document as presented by my parents. "Thanks for your help," I said, gathering the copies with unsteady hands. I sat in my truck in the county office parking lot, staring at the mortgage document. This explained everything. My parents had taken out a substantial loan against the property, using my forged signature to do it. But why? What was so urgent that they needed to commit fraud to get their hands on $175,000? And why kick me out now? If they were willing to forge my signature, why not just continue the deception? Unless they were planning to sell the house entirely. That would require my actual presence and real signature at a closing, something they couldn't fake. So they needed me out, and they needed to establish that Bryce was the new owner to remove my claim to the property. I pulled out my phone and called Samantha again. "They forged my signature on a new mortgage," I said without preamble when she answered. "Are you certain?" 100%. I'm looking at a copy of the document right now. It's dated 3 weeks ago, And I never signed anything. She was silent for a moment. This changes things, Arlo. This isn't just a family disagreement anymore. This is fraud. What should I do? First, secure that document and all your other evidence. Second, don't confront your parents about this forgery yet. We want to understand the full picture before showing our hand. Understood. And Arlo? Be careful. People who commit fraud once rarely stop there. There may be more we haven't uncovered yet. After ending the call, I sat for a long moment, trying to process this betrayal. My own parents had not only gone back on our agreement, but they had committed a crime that could potentially leave me on the hook for a massive debt I never agreed to. The hurt was morphing into something else now. Determination. I would not be their victim. I would not simply walk away from my home and 5 years of investment. And I certainly would not accept liability for their fraudulent loan. It was time to dig deeper. The next day, I expanded my investigation, visiting the property tax department to examine payment records for the house. What I found only deepened my concern. Property taxes had gone unpaid for the past 2 quarters, something completely out of character for my fiscally responsible parents. Late fees and penalties were accumulating, another sign that something was seriously wrong with their finances. The property's history revealed another surprise. According to the original deed transfer documentation, my grandfather had included a restrictive clause when transferring the property to my parents 15 years ago. The clause stated that the property should pass to his eldest grandchild upon reaching the age of 30 or upon my parents' decision to sell. That eldest grandchild was me. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. The house should have been mine by birthright according to my grandfather's wishes, not just through the agreement I had made with my parents. They had concealed this fact from me entirely. I needed to understand more about the family's financial situation. My cousin Jordan worked at First National Bank, where my parents and the family business had always kept their accounts. We had drifted apart over the years, mainly because Jordan had been vocal about disapproving of how my parents favored Bryce, which had created tension at family gatherings. I found his number and called him. "Arlo? This is unexpected," Jordan answered, surprise evident in his voice. "I know it's been a while," I said, "but I need your help with something important." "What's going on?" I gave him a brief summary of the situation, including the demand that I vacate the house and the discovery of the forged mortgage. Jordan was silent for a moment before responding. "I've been waiting for something like this to happen, to be honest. Uncle Jack and Aunt Martha have been making some suspicious transactions lately." "What kind of transactions?" "I can't give you specifics because of confidentiality rules, but I can tell you that large sums have been moving out of their accounts, far more than their normal expenses or business operations would explain." "Do you have any idea where the money is going?" Jordan hesitated. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but given that they've potentially committed fraud against you, there have been multiple wire transfers to an account associated with Capital City Gaming Enterprises, the casino. Bryce had mentioned going there with friends several times in recent months. But this suggested something far more serious than casual gambling. "Do you know how much?" I asked. "Let's just say the total approaches $200,000 over the past year." I let out a low whistle. "That would explain the new mortgage. And possibly the unpaid property taxes you mentioned," Jordan added. "Look, Arlo, I don't have all the details, but from what I can see, Uncle Jack and Aunt Martha are in financial trouble. Serious trouble. Because of Bryce's gambling, that would be my guess. Yes." After thanking Jordan and promising to keep in touch, I had just hung up when my phone rang again. It was my sister Carrie, who lived 3 states away, and whom I hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 months. "Arlo? What the hell is going on? Mom just called me crying about how you're threatening to sue them over the house." "What? That's not what's happening at all." I explained the actual situation to Carrie, including the dinner ultimatum, the forged mortgage, and what I had learned about Bryce's apparent gambling problem. "Oh my God," she said when I finished. "That explains the weird call I got from Bryce last month, asking if he could borrow $30,000 for an investment opportunity. I told him I didn't have that kind of money just lying around, and he got really angry." Did you tell Mom and Dad about it? I tried to, but they brushed it off. Said Bryce was just going through a rough patch and would figure things out. Well, apparently their solution is to sacrifice my house and financial future to save him. Again, Carrie was silent for a moment. This isn't right, Arlo. What are you going to do? I'm still figuring that out. But I'm not walking away from my home, and I'm definitely not accepting responsibility for a fraudulent loan. What can I do to help? Her immediate offer of support caught me off guard. Carrie and I had always been close growing up, but distance and our busy lives had created a gap between us in recent years. Actually, there might be something. Do you still have Grandpa's old papers? The ones Mom said you could take for that family history project you were working on? Yes. They're in my storage closet. Why? I need to know if there's anything about the house in there. Specifically about his intentions for who should own it after Mom and Dad. I'll look tonight and call you back, Carrie promised. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, processing everything I had learned. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than I had initially thought. My brother had a serious gambling problem. My parents were draining their finances to cover his debts. And now they were trying to take my house, possibly to sell it to raise more cash for Bryce's problems. But the discovery of my grandfather's original intentions for the property added a new dimension to the betrayal. This wasn't just about them going back on our agreement. They had been concealing my rightful inheritance from the beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read simply, "Brother, we need to talk. Alone. It's about the house. Meet me at Wilson Park tomorrow at noon." It was from Bryce. I stared at the message, wondering what new angle my brother was working. Was this a genuine attempt to explain himself, or another manipulation? Only one way to find out. "I'll be there," I texted back. Later that evening, Carrie called as promised. "Arlo, I found something you need to see," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "There's a letter from Grandpa, addressed to all of us grandchildren, that was never delivered. And there's a copy of his original will, not the revised one that was executed after he died." "What do they say?" "The letter explains that he set up trust funds for each of his grandchildren, equal amounts for all of us, to be given when we turned 25. And the will specifies that the house on Maple Street was to go directly to you upon his death, not to Mom and Dad." I felt a cold weight settling in my stomach. So they changed the will. It looks that way. The revised will that was executed gave everything to Mom and Dad, with no mention of the trust funds or the house going to you. Grandpa died only 2 months after his stroke. He could barely speak, let alone revise legal documents. "Exactly," Carrie said grimly. "Arlo, I think they've been stealing from all of us for years." The revelation landed like a physical blow. It wasn't just me they had betrayed. It was all the grandchildren. It was their own father. "I'm going to scan everything and send it to you right now," Carrie said. "And Arlo, whatever you're planning, I want in." My silent nodding at that dinner table was starting to feel less like defeat and more like the beginning of something else entirely. Justice, long overdue, was finally on the horizon. I was making a sandwich the next day when a car pulled into my driveway. Actually, 3 cars. My parents' SUV, Bryce's sports car, and a pickup truck I didn't recognize. So much for Bryce's request to meet alone at the park. I watched through the kitchen window as my father, mother, Bryce, and a burly man I didn't know emerged from the vehicles and approached my front door. The stranger hung back slightly, his posture suggesting he wasn't family but some sort of associate. The doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath, I went to answer it. "Arlo," my mother said when I opened the door, her voice sweet with artificial concern. "We need to talk, sweetheart." "All of us?" I asked, glancing pointedly at the stranger. "This is Frank Donovan," my father said, not quite meeting my eyes. "He's a business associate helping us with some property matters." "A real estate agent, then? Or maybe an investor looking to buy the house once I was out of the picture?" Either way, his presence confirmed my suspicions about their intentions for the property. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. I led them to the living room, noticing how my mother's eyes darted appraisingly around the space, taking in the improvements I had made since her last visit. The recessed lighting that had taken me a full week to install. The built-in entertainment center that had replaced the shabby prefabricated unit that came with the house. "You've done nice work in here, son," Frank said, clearly trying to establish rapport. I nodded, but didn't respond. Let them make the first substantive move. My father cleared his throat. "Arlo, we know the other night at dinner came as a shock to you. We could have handled it better." "You think?" I kept my voice neutral. "The thing is," my mother interjected, "family has to stick together during difficult times. And right now, Bryce needs our help." "He always needs help," I said. "What makes this time different?" My brother shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Look, Arlo, I know we've had our differences, but this is serious. I'm in some trouble. Gambling debts," I stated flatly. The shock on their faces was almost comical. My father recovered first. "Who told you that? Does it matter? What matters is that you're trying to solve Bryce's problems by creating problems for me." My mother reached for my hand, which I smoothly moved away. "Sweetheart, you're young and talented. You can start over somewhere else. Bryce doesn't have your skills or your resourcefulness. So I get punished for being responsible, while he gets rewarded for his recklessness." "Again, that's not fair, Arlo," my father said, his voice hardening. "We've always treated you boys equally." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Really? Is that why you hid Grandpa's will from me? The one that specifically left this house to me?" The color drained from my mother's face. "What are you talking about?" "I know about the original will, Mom. The one you and Dad had conveniently revised after Grandpa's stroke. I know about the trust funds he set up for all the grandchildren that somehow disappeared." My father stood up abruptly. "That's enough. We didn't come here to dig up ancient history." "You mean your fraud? That kind of ancient history?" Frank, the business associate, was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Perhaps I should wait outside while the family discusses these matters privately." "No need," I said. "I'm sure they want you to hear how they forged my signature on a new mortgage for this property, too." Frank froze halfway to standing. "Excuse me? They didn't mention that part, did they? How they took out a $175,000 loan against this property, using my forged signature as a co-signer." Frank looked at my father, who had turned an alarming shade of red. "Jack, what is he talking about?" "He's exaggerating," my father sputtered. "There was a misunderstanding with some paperwork, that's all." "A misunderstanding?" I pulled out a folder from beside my chair and extracted the copy of the mortgage document. My signature on a document I never saw, for a loan I knew nothing about, is a bit more than a misunderstanding. It's fraud. Frank stood up fully now. "I think I'd better go after all. Jack, Martha, we can continue our discussion another time." "Wait, Frank," my mother said desperately. "It's not what it sounds like." But Frank was already moving toward the door, clearly wanting no part of what he now realized was a legally problematic situation. After he left, my father turned on me, anger replacing his earlier conciliatory tone. "Look what you've done. We had a buyer lined up, and you've scared him off with your accusations." "A buyer? So you were planning to sell the house." "We need the capital," my father admitted grudgingly. "For the business. For Bryce's gambling debts, you mean." Bryce, who had been unusually quiet throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "It's not just gambling, okay? I borrowed some money from people you don't want to owe money to." "How much?" I asked. He looked away. "About 200,000. Jesus. Bryce. I was trying to make it back. I had a system, but then things went sideways, and now these guys are threatening me." My mother put her arm around Bryce protectively. "That's why we need to resolve this quickly, Arlo. It's not just about money anymore. It's about Bryce's safety. So you're willing to commit fraud, steal my house, and potentially ruin my financial future to save him from his own terrible decisions." "Again, he's your brother," my father said, as if that explained and justified everything. And I'm your son, I countered. But you seem to forget that whenever it's convenient. My mother tried a different approach, her eyes welling with tears. Arlo, please. We raised you. We gave you opportunities. We let you live in this house for the past 5 years. Let me? I've been paying for it with below-market wages and tens of thousands of dollars in improvements. Not to mention, according to Grandpa's will, it should have been mine all along. We've done so much for you over the years, my father said, his tone now accusatory. And this is how you repay us? By threatening legal action against your own parents? I haven't threatened anything yet, I said calmly. I've simply stated facts. Well, here's another fact, my father snapped. You have 3 days to get out, or your stuff goes on the curb. Bryce stood up, suddenly emboldened by our father's aggression. Yeah, and if you fight this, I'll make sure everyone in the family knows what an ungrateful, selfish person you are. Always thinking of yourself, instead of helping family in need. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw the desperation behind his bluster. He was scared, not just of the people he owed money to, but of facing the consequences of his actions for once in his life. I need more time, I said finally. 3 days, my father repeated firmly. 5, I countered. I need 5 days to organize a move of this scale. My parents exchanged glances, clearly thinking they were winning this negotiation. Fine. 5 days, my father conceded, but not 1 day more. And I want something in writing, acknowledging the work I've put into this house. Some form of compensation. My father waved his hand dismissively. We'll figure something out. Maybe a small payment plan. I also want written confirmation that I'm not responsible for the new mortgage you took out using my forged signature. This made them both stiffen. We didn't forge anything, my mother insisted unconvincingly. Then explain how my signature appears on a mortgage document I never signed. There must have been a mix-up at the bank, my father said. Paperwork gets confused sometimes. So you'll have no problem providing me with a document stating that I have no liability for that loan. We'll need to consult our attorney about that, my father hedged. Of course you will. I stood up, indicating the conversation was over. 5 days. And I expect that liability document before I turn over the keys. We'll see, my father said, which we both knew meant no. As they prepared to leave, I casually picked up my phone from the side table. By the way, do you like the security upgrades I've made recently? The new cameras cover every approach to the house. Records everything. Audio, too. My father froze, then looked around, spotting the small, unobtrusive camera in the corner of the living room ceiling. Its red recording light blinked steadily. You've been recording us? Without our knowledge? It's my house, Dad. At least for the next 5 days. I can record whatever I want here. The implications of what I had just revealed washed over all of them. The entire conversation, including their admissions about the property sale, Bryce's gambling debts, and their evasiveness about the forged mortgage, had been captured on video. Delete that recording, my father demanded. I smiled for the first time since they had arrived. No, I don't think I will. They left shortly after, my mother tearful, my father seething, and Bryce uncharacteristically silent. As their cars pulled away, I checked the security app on my phone, confirming that everything had indeed been recorded perfectly. I had bought myself 5 days and gathered valuable evidence in the process. Now it was time to put it all to use. The moment my family left, I called Samantha. I've got recorded evidence, I told her. They admitted to planning to sell the house without my knowledge, confirmed Bryce's gambling debts, and were evasive about the forged mortgage. That's excellent, Samantha said. Did they explicitly admit to the forgery? No. They claimed it was a mistake at the bank. Typical. But their behavior and evasiveness still works in our favor. What's your timeline now? They're giving me 5 days to vacate. Perfect. That gives us enough time to prepare. I've reviewed everything you've sent me so far, and Arlo, you have a very strong case. The agreement you have, combined with evidence of your investment in the property and your grandfather's original will, creates multiple valid claims to the house. Strong enough to stop them? More than strong enough. But I think we should aim for more than just keeping the house. We should address the broader pattern of financial manipulation. What do you mean? Your parents have potentially defrauded not just you, but all of your grandfather's grandchildren through the hidden trust funds. That's a much bigger issue than just the house. She was right, of course. The house was important to me, but the revelation about my grandfather's will suggested a pattern of deception that affected my sister, my cousins, and me. So what's our next step? I asked. I want to meet with you tomorrow to go over legal strategy. In the meantime, continue gathering evidence, especially anything related to your grandfather's original intentions for his estate. After ending the call with Samantha, I sent a text to Carrie updating her on the situation. She responded immediately. I'm coming. Taking time off work. We'll be there tomorrow evening. Her support meant more than I could express. For too long I had been fighting this battle alone, not even fully understanding what I was up against. I spent the rest of the day continuing to document every aspect of the house, taking videos of all the improvements I had made, creating a detailed inventory of materials and labor costs. By midnight, I had compiled an exhaustive record of my investment in the property. The next morning, I met with Samantha at her law office. She had already prepared several legal documents based on the evidence I had provided. We have multiple angles to pursue, she explained. First, the enforcement of your written agreement regarding the house. Second, challenging the validity of the mortgage based on the forged signature. Third, potentially reopening your grandfather's estate based on evidence of the altered will. Which approach is best? All of them, Samantha said with a determined smile. We create maximum pressure by pursuing every legitimate claim simultaneously. That said, I think our strongest immediate position is challenging the mortgage. Why's that? Because it's the most recent and clearest violation, and it creates potential criminal liability. The statute of limitations on tampering with your grandfather's will might be an issue, but mortgage fraud? That's fresh and provable. I nodded, understanding her strategy. So, what happens in 5 days when they expect me to leave? You don't leave. By tomorrow, we'll have filed for an emergency injunction preventing any change in the property's status or occupancy until the legal issues are resolved. They can't kick you out without a formal eviction process anyway, which would take months, and with our filings, that process can't even begin. Relief washed over me. So I can stay in my house. Absolutely. And I recommend enhancing your security immediately. Change the locks. Upgrade your security system. Document everything that happens on the property. Already started on that, I assured her. Good. Now, do you have contact information for the other grandchildren besides your sister? If we're going to address the trust fund issue, they should be involved. I provided contact details for my cousins, including Jordan, who had already been helpful. Samantha promised to reach out to them discreetly to explain the situation. As I left her office, I felt a weight lifting. For the first time since that disastrous family dinner, I had a clear path forward. I wasn't powerless against my parents' manipulation. When I returned home, I found a locksmith's van already in my driveway. Carrie had arrived early and taken the initiative. Hope you don't mind, she said as she hugged me. I figured new locks were step one. Perfect timing. I was just going to call for exactly that. We spent the afternoon working together to secure the house. New deadbolts on all exterior doors. Security cameras covering every approach to the property. Motion sensor lights around the perimeter. It's like we're preparing for a siege, Carrie observed as we tested the new security system. In a way, we are. They're not going to give up easily. They never thought you'd fight back, she said. That's their mistake. By evening, my cousin Jordan had arrived, bringing with him additional documentation he had discreetly obtained from the bank. I could lose my job for this, he admitted. But what they've done to the family is worse than breaking confidentiality rules. The documents he provided confirmed our suspicions. My parents had been systematically draining accounts associated with the family business for months, redirecting funds to cover Bryce's mounting debts. They had also taken out loans against several other family properties. They're leveraging everything they can get their hands on, Jordan explained. It's financially reckless, even without considering the fraud aspect. As we reviewed the documentation together, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. Arlo? Samantha Williams contacted me about Grandpa's will. Is it true? Did Jack and Martha hide trust funds from all of you kids? It looks that way, Aunt Patricia. We're still gathering evidence, but what we've found so far isn't good. Patricia's voice hardened. I knew something wasn't right when they suddenly came into all that money after Dad died. Jack claimed it was from selling off Dad's investments, but the numbers never added up. Would you be willing to help us piece this together? Maybe you remember details that could be important. I'll do more than that, she said firmly. I'm coming over, and I'm bringing all the family financial records I still have from when I was helping Dad manage his affairs before the stroke. By the next afternoon, 2 days after my parents' ultimatum, my house had become an impromptu command center. Carrie and Jordan had set up laptops on the dining room table. Aunt Patricia had arrived with boxes of financial records. Uncle Frank, my father's brother who had long been estranged from the family after a business disagreement, had joined us after hearing what was happening. Your father pulled the same stunt with me when we were business partners, Uncle Frank revealed, his voice tight with old anger. Claimed my share of the construction company was worth half what it actually was when he bought me out. Even my cousin Ashley, Aunt Patricia's daughter, had driven in from 3 states away to help and to learn what had happened to her own trust fund. Samantha arrived in the late afternoon, surprised to find the house full of family members. Well, she said, looking around at the operation we had assembled, this certainly beats the usual client meeting. Together, we spent hours organizing documents, creating timelines, and building a comprehensive picture of my parents' financial manipulations over the years. The pattern was clear and disturbing. For at least 15 years, they had been systematically redirecting family assets to themselves and, increasingly, to cover Bryce's financial disasters. The trust funds alone would have given each grandchild approximately $90,000, Aunt Patricia calculated, reviewing her father's financial records. With 5 grandchildren, that's nearly $500,000 simply disappeared. And that's just the beginning, Uncle Frank added grimly. If we factor in Jack's manipulation of business assets, property values, and inheritance distributions, we're looking at potentially millions diverted over the years. As the scale of the deception became clear, I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about years of calculated betrayal that had affected the entire extended family. By the time everyone except Carrie left for the evening, we had assembled walls of documentation, printed emails, financial statements, property records, photos, timeline charts. My living room looked like something from a police procedural television show. Do you think this will be enough? Carrie asked as we stood surveying our work. It has to be, I said. They've gotten away with this for far too long. We spent the next day finalizing preparations. Samantha filed the emergency injunction protecting my occupancy of the house. She also prepared legal notices regarding the fraudulent mortgage and a petition to reopen our grandfather's estate based on the new evidence. Uncle Frank contacted Mr. Gaines, the family attorney who had handled my grandfather's affairs, and who had always seemed uncomfortable around my parents after Grandpa died. After hearing a summary of what we had discovered, Mr. Gaines agreed to meet with us. I've carried this burden for years, he admitted, when he arrived at the house. I knew something wasn't right with the revised will, but I couldn't prove it. Your grandfather was barely conscious when they claimed he wanted to make changes. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. The elderly attorney sighed heavily. Professional ethics placed me in a difficult position. Without clear evidence of fraud, I was bound by attorney-client privilege. But I kept copies of everything, including the original will and trust documents, hoping someday the truth would come out. He opened his briefcase and removed a folder. This should help your case considerably. Inside was a copy of my grandfather's original notarized will, explicitly leaving the house to me and establishing trust funds for all 5 grandchildren. There was also a handwritten note from my grandfather to Mr. Gaines, expressing concern that my parents might try to alter his wishes after his health declined. He knew, I said softly. He knew they might do this. Your grandfather was a shrewd judge of character, Mr. Gaines confirmed. That's why he tried to set things up to protect his grandchildren's interests. By the evening of the second day, everything was in place. The legal filings had been submitted. The security systems were operational. The evidence was organized and compelling. All that remained was to wait for my parents to make their move. They'll come tomorrow, I predicted to Carrie as we ate a late dinner. They'll want to check on my progress with moving out. And they'll find a very different situation than they're expecting, she said with grim satisfaction. That night, I slept more soundly than I had since the family dinner. Whatever happened next, I was prepared. This was my home, and I wasn't leaving without a fight. Exactly 48 hours after my parents had left my house believing they had won, their SUV pulled into my driveway once again. Bryce's sports car followed close behind. This time, they were alone. No real estate associate accompanying them. I watched them through the front window, noting my father's confident stride and my mother's smug expression. They still believed they were in control of this situation. That illusion was about to be shattered. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep breath before answering it. "We're here to see how the packing is coming along," my father announced, as he stepped inside, without waiting for an invitation. He stopped abruptly when he entered the living room. Instead of boxes and moving preparations, he found the room transformed into what looked like an investigation headquarters. Document-covered boards lined the walls. A large timeline chart dominated one wall, detailing years of financial manipulation. Laptops and files covered the dining table where Carrie, Aunt Patricia, Uncle Frank, and Samantha sat waiting. "What? What is this?" my mother stammered, her eyes darting nervously between the familiar faces. "This," I said calmly, "is the family meeting we should have had years ago. Arlo, what have you done?" My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "I've simply gathered the truth, Dad. All of it. From Grandpa's original will to the forged mortgage documents to the misappropriated trust funds." "Martha," Aunt Patricia said, standing up from the table. "Jack, it's been a long time." My father's expression hardened at the sight of his sister. "Patricia, what are you doing here?" "Supporting my nephew, and looking for answers about our father's estate that never seemed to add up." "This is ridiculous," my father blustered. "A family disagreement about housing arrangements, and you've turned it into some kind of conspiracy theory circus. It stopped being just a family disagreement when you forged my signature on a mortgage document," I pointed out. "And when you altered Dad's will while he was incapacitated," Aunt Patricia added. "And when you misrepresented the value of our business partnership," Uncle Frank chimed in, joining his sister. My father took a step back, suddenly looking cornered. "These are serious allegations. You can't prove any of this." "Actually, we can," Samantha said, standing up and introducing herself. "I'm Samantha Williams, Arlo's attorney. We have extensive documentation supporting every claim, including the original versions of your father's will and trust documents, provided by Mr. Gaines." "Gaines? That old fool is involved in this too?" My father's voice rose in anger, tinged with panic. "He kept copies of everything, Dad," I said. "He always suspected something wasn't right with the revised will." My mother, who had remained unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "This is all a misunderstanding. We were only doing what was best for the family." "By stealing from your own children?" Carrie asked, her voice tight with emotion. "By taking trust funds Grandpa set up specifically for us?" "You don't understand the pressures of running a family business," my father insisted. "Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good, and those difficult decisions always seem to benefit Bryce at everyone else's expense," I observed. My brother, who had been hovering near the door looking increasingly uncomfortable, flinched at the mention of his name. "Leave him out of this," my mother said defensively. "He's had his struggles." "We know about the gambling debts, Mom," I said. All $200,000 of them. Bryce paled. How did you? The same way we know about everything else. We did our research. We followed the money. We talked to people who knew the truth. A knock at the door interrupted us. I opened it to find Jordan and Ashley arriving together, completing our family gathering. My parents' eyes widened at the sight of more family members joining the intervention. You've turned the entire family against us, my mother accused, tears welling in her eyes. No, Mom. Your actions turned the family against you. I just helped everyone see the truth. We all moved to the living room, where every available seat was taken by family members united in their search for answers. My parents remained standing, looking increasingly isolated. So what exactly is it you want? My father finally asked, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Samantha took the lead, laying out our demands clearly and concisely. First, acknowledgement that the house was rightfully mine, as stipulated in both my agreement with them and my grandfather's original will. Second, a full accounting of the trust funds and other assets that should have been distributed to the grandchildren. Third, a signed statement admitting the mortgage signature was forged and accepting full responsibility for the loan. This is extortion, my father sputtered. No, Jack, Uncle Frank said firmly. This is accountability, something you've been avoiding for far too long. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Samantha added. The easy way involves family resolution, signed agreements, and everyone moving forward with clarity. The hard way involves court proceedings, potential criminal charges for fraud and forgery, and public exposure of everything we've documented. You wouldn't dare, my father challenged, though his voice lacked conviction. We have already begun, Samantha replied calmly. The emergency injunction protecting Arlo's occupancy of this house was filed yesterday. The petition to reopen your father's estate based on evidence of will tampering has also been submitted. We're prepared to proceed with the forgery and fraud claims next. My father looked at each face in the room, perhaps searching for any sign of wavering resolve. He found none. For possibly the first time in his adult life, his intimidation tactics and manipulation weren't working. Unexpectedly, Bryce stepped forward into the center of the room. Stop, Dad. It's over. All eyes turned to my brother. Bryce, be quiet, my father warned. No, I'm done with the lies. My brother turned to face me directly. I'm sorry, Arlo. I knew what they were doing with the house wasn't right. I knew about Grandpa's will too. I found papers in Dad's office years ago but kept quiet because it benefited me. Bryce, my mother gasped. Let him speak, Aunt Patricia said firmly. The gambling got out of control, Bryce continued, his voice shaking. At first, Mom and Dad covered smaller debts, telling me it was temporary help while I got back on my feet. But it kept getting worse, and I kept hiding how bad it really was until I borrowed money from people you don't want to owe money to. And your solution was to take Arlo's house? Carrie asked incredulously. Bryce shook his head. That was their solution. They said they could sell the house to pay off my debts and still have enough left over to buy me a small condo to start fresh. I went along with it because I was desperate. My mother had collapsed into an armchair, her face buried in her hands. My father stood rigid, his expression unreadable. I need help, Bryce admitted, looking around the room. Real help, not just money to make problems temporarily disappear. I have a gambling addiction, and covering it up has only made it worse. This raw honesty from my usually evasive brother stunned everyone into momentary silence. Then, unexpectedly, Uncle Frank spoke up. There are good treatment programs for gambling addiction, Bryce. I know because I went through one myself years ago. Another surprise revelation that seemed to shift the energy in the room. The issue now, Samantha redirected gently, is how we move forward. We can spend years in court, draining whatever resources the family has left in legal fees. Or we can reach an agreement today that acknowledges the truth and begins to make things right. My father finally spoke, his voice subdued. What exactly would this agreement entail? While Samantha outlined the proposed terms, I watched my parents closely. The facade had crumbled. Years of manipulation and control were collapsing under the weight of exposed truths. They looked suddenly older, diminished. After several hours of tense negotiation, interrupted by outbursts, tears, and occasional moments of genuine remorse, we reached an agreement. The house would remain mine, with all claims by my parents formally relinquished. They would provide a full accounting of all misappropriated funds from my grandfather's estate, with a repayment plan to all affected grandchildren. They would submit a formal correction to the mortgage company regarding the forged signature. Bryce agreed to enter a treatment program for his gambling addiction, with the family providing support for his recovery, but not for his debts. Those he would have to address through a structured repayment plan of his own. As evening approached, the atmosphere in the room had transformed from confrontational to exhausted but resolute. Legal documents were drafted, reviewed, and signed. Promises were made, this time with accountability mechanisms built in. My parents left last, escorted to their car by Uncle Frank, who had somehow assumed the role of family mediator. Through the window, I could see my father's defeated posture as he slid into the driver's seat, a man whose carefully constructed world of manipulation had finally collapsed. "Do you think they'll honor the agreement?" Carrie asked as we watched them drive away. "They don't have much choice," Samantha responded. "The alternative is legal proceedings that could result in criminal charges. Besides, with the entire family now aware and involved, there's no going back to the old patterns." As our impromptu family council dispersed with promises to stay connected and see the process through, I stood in my living room, looking around at the home I had fought so hard to keep. It was mine now, truly and legally mine. But the victory felt complicated, layered with both vindication and sadness. "You did the right thing," Carrie said, seeming to read my thoughts. "This wasn't just about the house. It was about breaking a cycle of manipulation that has damaged this family for decades." She was right. This confrontation had never been about real estate or money, not really. It had been about truth, justice, and finally standing up to those who had exploited family loyalty for personal gain. I slept in my own bed that night, in my own home, with a sense of resolution I hadn't felt in years. The road ahead would not be easy, particularly rebuilding relationships within the family. But for the first time, that road would be built on honesty rather than manipulation, on accountability rather than exploitation. The house was mine. The truth was out. And a new chapter for our family had begun. 3 months passed quickly after the confrontation that changed everything. The legal agreements we reached that day held firm, though not without occasional resistance from my parents. Old habits die hard, and they made several attempts to renegotiate terms or delay promised accountings of misappropriated funds. Each time, the united front of family members, backed by Samantha's legal expertise, maintained the boundaries we had established. The mortgage company launched an investigation into the forged signature after receiving our documentation. My father initially tried to maintain the fiction of a paperwork error, but eventually admitted to the forgery when faced with the prospect of forensic handwriting analysis. The loan was officially removed from my name, though my parents still faced potential consequences for fraud. Bryce, to everyone's surprise, embraced his recovery with determination. The gambling addiction treatment program Uncle Frank recommended was rigorous, requiring daily commitment and complete honesty. "It's like learning to breathe again," Bryce told me during one of our now regular coffee meetings. "For years, the gambling was how I coped with feeling like I could never measure up to you." "To me?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Mom and Dad always favored you." "They enabled me," Bryce corrected. "That's different from respect. They never trusted me to handle anything important in the business, never expected me to contribute anything meaningful. You, though, they relied on you, depended on you. I was jealous of that." These conversations with my brother were tentative at first, laden with years of resentment and competition. But gradually, a new relationship began to emerge, one based on mutual respect rather than rivalry. My relationship with my parents remained more complicated. The exposure of their decades of manipulation had created a breach that wouldn't be easily repaired. We spoke occasionally, mainly about practical matters related to our agreements, but the easy familiarity of family had been replaced by something more formal, more distant. "Give it time," Aunt Patricia advised when I expressed concern about the estrangement. "They're still processing what happened, still adjusting to the new reality where they can't control everything and everyone." "Do you think we'll ever have a normal family relationship again?" I asked. "Normal is relative," she said wisely. "But healthier? Yes, I believe that's possible. It will take time, boundaries, and consistent accountability." Meanwhile, my house underwent another transformation. With my legal ownership finally secured, I completed the remaining renovations that had been on hold during the conflict. The back deck that I had been planning for 2 years finally took shape, a spacious outdoor living area perfect for gatherings. But the most significant change came from an unexpected direction. As I considered the 5-bedroom house, now fully renovated and far more space than I needed for myself, an idea began to form. I contacted a nonprofit organization that helped young adults transitioning out of foster care find affordable housing while establishing their careers. After several meetings and careful planning, I converted the upstairs of my home into 2 separate apartment units, each with private entrances, bathrooms, and small kitchenettes. 6 weeks later, I welcomed my first tenants: Maya, a 23-year-old nursing student, and Devin, a 24-year-old apprentice electrician. Both were aging out of support systems and struggling to find affordable housing in our increasingly expensive town. "The rent is below market," I explained as I showed them their spaces. "In exchange, I ask that you maintain the property with me and contribute to shared utility costs." "Why are you doing this?" Maya asked directly. "Most landlords are trying to maximize profits, not subsidize strangers. Because I know what it's like to work hard for something and still have the system stacked against you," I told her. "Sometimes people just need a fair chance." The arrangement worked better than I could have hoped. My home became a small community of motivated young people supporting each other. We shared occasional meals, exchanged skills and advice, and respected each other's independence. The empty, echoing spaces that had sometimes felt lonely now hummed with positive energy. Family relationships continued to evolve over those months as well. Carrie and I reconnected in a meaningful way, speaking several times a week and visiting whenever possible. The shared experience of standing up to our parents had strengthened our bond, reminding us of the close relationship we'd had as children. The wider family, too, began healing from years of division. Uncle Frank and Aunt Patricia organized a family gathering, the first in over a decade, that wasn't tainted by underlying tensions and manipulations. Cousins who had grown up barely knowing each other shared stories and found common ground. My parents attended that gathering, somewhat stiff and uncomfortable but present nonetheless. My father took me aside at one point, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "The house looks good," he said awkwardly. "You've done well with it." Coming from him, this simple acknowledgement meant more than I wanted to admit. "Thanks, Dad. Your grandfather would have approved of what you're doing with the upstairs apartments," he added, surprising me with this reference to a painful subject. He always believed in helping young people get started. I didn't know that about him. "There's a lot you didn't know. Should have known. That's on me." It wasn't an apology, not explicitly. But from my father, this admission of fault was unprecedented. A small step, perhaps, but a step nonetheless. 6 months after the confrontation, I hosted a housewarming dinner for what I had come to think of as my chosen family. Carrie and her husband drove in from out of state. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Frank arrived early to help with preparations. Cousins Jordan and Ashley brought their spouses. Samantha, whose legal work had evolved into genuine friendship, came with her partner. Maya and Devin joined us as well, now firmly part of the household. Bryce arrived last, somewhat nervous but steady in his 6 months of recovery. He brought a handcrafted wooden serving bowl he had made in a woodworking class, a new hobby he had discovered during treatment. "It's not perfect," he said as he handed it to me, "but I made it myself. No shortcuts. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. It's beautiful, Bryce. Thank you. We gathered around the large dining table that I had built myself during those early years in the house. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable pauses of people who feel secure in each other's company. As I looked around at the faces of those who had supported me through the most challenging period of my life, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The house that had been the center of so much conflict had become something greater than property or financial investment. It had become the catalyst for truth, for boundaries, for healing. "I'd like to propose a toast," Uncle Frank said, raising his glass. "To Arlo, who had the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it meant challenging his own family. And to all of us, for choosing truth over comfortable lies." "To truth," everyone echoed, glasses clinking. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Carrie pulled me aside on the newly completed deck. "You know what I realized tonight?" she said, looking out at the yard illuminated by the string lights I had installed. "This whole ordeal with the house, as painful as it was, actually gave us back our family. The real one, not the dysfunctional version we had before." "I hadn't thought of it that way," I admitted. "Before, we were all isolated from each other, each dealing with Mom and Dad's manipulation individually. Now we're connected, supporting each other." She was right. The confrontation had broken old, unhealthy patterns and created space for new, healthier ones to form. As the last guests departed, and I began cleaning up, I paused in the living room where, months earlier, we had staged our family intervention. The evidence boards and document piles were long gone, replaced by comfortable furniture and personal touches that made the space truly mine. The house was now officially and legally in my name, the deed transferred and recorded properly. The mortgage my parents had taken out was being handled through a structured payment plan they had negotiated with the bank. The trust funds meant for the grandchildren were being gradually restored through payments from my parents' retirement accounts. But the true resolution wasn't in legal documents or financial settlements. It was in the boundaries that had been established, the truths that had been spoken, and the authentic relationships that were now possible. I had learned that sometimes fighting back doesn't mean shouting the loudest or striking the hardest. Sometimes it means quietly gathering evidence, building support, and standing firmly in your truth. It means refusing to be manipulated or exploited, even by those who claim to love you. Family, I had discovered, is not just defined by blood or legal ties. It's created through respect, honesty, and mutual support. Sometimes the family you choose, or the family you rebuild after painful truths are confronted, is stronger than the one you were born into. As I turned out the lights on that meaningful evening, I felt at peace in my home, in a way that transcended legal ownership. This house, these people, this life I was building, they were mine not because of any document or agreement, but because I had fought for them with integrity and purpose. And that was a foundation no one could ever take away. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were taking advantage of your good nature? What did you learn from the experience? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you found value in it. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming difficult family situations, and share with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to face your own challenging family dynamics.